everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Kaya Health Podcast. Today, we have our first guest joining the podcast, Rosana John, and she's joined to talk to us about her experience wearing a continuous glucose monitor, also known as a CGM. This episode was so informative. I learned so much for myself, so many things that I'm going to actually apply to my life going forward, and so many other golden nuggets that she dropped as she shared her experience. So I hope you find it as interesting as I did. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. Well, Rosanna, I'd like to welcome you to the Kaya Health Podcast. We're so excited to have you join us today. And for those of you who don't already know Rosanna, she is an attorney, lecturer, she's a food blogger, and she has specifically a keen interest in global health law and how the law can be used as a tool to reduce the incidence of non-communicable diseases. Rosanna is a self-proclaimed biohacker who is constantly seeking ways to optimize her health and performance. And that is the main reason that I was so excited to have her here today. I've been following Rosanna's journey on social media. And when I even came up with the idea that I kind of wanted to do a podcast that talks about health, your name was actually one of the first names that I wrote down. I was like, I have to make sure I get Rosanna on here. So I was very excited when she said yes. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Very happy to have you. So is there anything that I missed? Anything that you want to add about who you are, what you do?
No, just tell people check out Radical Rose Eats if you want to follow along on my journey.
Yes. And are you I know you're on Instagram. Are you on any other social media platforms, TikTok, Facebook, or is it mainly Instagram?
Mainly Instagram is where I post. I also have a blog, so if people want to read about my experience with the continuous glucose monitor, I have a post up there, the radical with a K, radicalrose.com.
Okay, and I'll definitely link the blog and your Instagram page in the show notes so that it's really easy for people to find you. So
All right.
let's get started. Let's talk about this continuous glucose monitor. Now, for those people who don't have an idea of what it is, what is your understanding of what this CGM is and how it differs to like your regular glucose monitors?
Okay, so up until last year, I had never heard of a continuous glucose monitor. People refer to it as a CGM. So what I understand it to be is a device that you attach either to like your lower arm or your stomach, and it continuously measures your blood glucose. So the traditional way that we are familiar with is when you do a blood test, a formal blood
Mm-hmm.
test, so you go to a lab and get your blood drawn, or when you prick your fingertip. So those were the two methods that I was aware of for measuring your blood sugar. It was only last year I became aware of this device that you attach to your body that transfers the information to your phone or to some other type of reader that gives you real time readings of your blood glucose level. So it doesn't actually get into your blood. So the technology is a bit hazy to me. I'm not a scientific person per se, but some sort of interstitial fluid is what it reads. It doesn't read your actual blood,
Oh,
but
wow.
it's close enough that it usually has like a percentage margin of error from like finger pricking, sorry,
Freaking.
or blood test. So it's not as accurate, but it's not like big. The margin of error is not huge, so it still gives you a fairly accurate reading of what your blood sugar levels are. So what makes this revolutionary compared to finger pricking is that
Mm-hmm.
it's in real time. So you don't have to keep pricking your finger every second. So I can measure my blood sugar throughout at any time of the day or night, and I'll know exactly what it is at any given moment. So that can be a game changer for
Wow.
a lot of people. Because from what I understand, most diabetics would do their finger pricking like in the morning, so they have their
Yeah.
fasting blood sugar levels, and possibly at night. But most people don't check it out throughout the day. So they're not exactly sure what is happening throughout the day. And some of them, depending on how you set it up, it can have an alarm. So if your blood sugar gets dangerously high, it can warn you before perhaps you actually feel it, and it can help save you
Oh, wow.
from different things. So it's quite a revolutionary device.
Wow. So, how did you said before last year you didn't even know it existed. How did you find out about it and what made you decide that that was something that you want to try? If you don't mind me asking, are you diabetic?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so what, because in my mind, it's like how you get to looking into
Okay.
glucose monitors and saying, I think this is something that I want to do for myself.
Okay. So I do have a family history of diabetes. My
Okay.
father is currently diabetic. So I do have a family history of it. It's something that has been on my radar from since I was a child. Like my mother was always very conscious of our sugar consumption and that sort of thing. I actually got into the pre-diabetic range at some point in my life, and then I got it back to normal, but we could circle back to that. So diabetes has always been on my radar.
Mm.
But when I learned about the continuous glucose monitor, it was actually quite randomly. I was listening to a podcast by Lewis House, and he was interviewing Dr. Casey Means. She's the founder of Levels, one of the companies that makes a software that interprets CGM data. But at the time, I just randomly listened to the podcast. I didn't know what metabolic health was. I'm like, it seems interesting. Let me just listen to it. And I was just so fascinated because she is not diabetic. The people her software targets are not diabetics. So she spoke about how important blood sugar is to everyone. It's not just an issue for
Yeah.
diabetics and how it affects all these different aspects of your life. So I was like, wow, this was like completely new to me. So, I went down a rabbit hole, gone
I can
Google,
only imagine, yes.
reading all sorts of stuff. And that led me to somebody called Jessie Isha. I won't even try to pronounce her last name, lest I butcher it, but she's commonly known as the glucose goddess. So I
Oh,
started following her. I read her book, Glucose Revolution, and she is who propelled me further to get the CGM. Because on her Instagram, she would show the graphs about how different foods affect her. So I was
mm-hmm.
like, ooh, I want to know how it affects me because these things are highly individualized. So, of course, certain sweet foods might affect everybody the same, but we are all different. So, how a food might affect me and might affect you is different. So, while she might give you an idea, I still wanted to know exactly how different foods would
Breakdown.
affect me. So, that is what really fueled me to get it. And there are many different companies out there. For example, Levels was the first one I found out about, but I found it to be a bit expensive because you have to pay for the membership, then you have to pay for the glucose sensors. So I ended up using a company called Veri, but there are many others. There's NutriSense, many other companies that interpret the data. So what those companies do, they're software companies because all of them tend to use the same CGM, the same Abbott,
I see.
the same Freestyle Libre Abbott sensor. So what
Mm-hmm.
they do is help you to understand the data better. So like they would give you scores. So you eat a meal and it will give you like a 5 if it's okay, a 10 if it's excellent. So it's easier to just see the readings in deciliters. So you might, when you have a regular quote unquote CGM that uses the software that comes with it. For instance, if you eat something, you would have to come back and check 2 hours later, and it would tell you your blood glucose level rose to, let's say, 120 deciliters. But you don't know what that means.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the software makes it easier. It tells you good, bad. I think that is what makes those software that are targeted at non-diabetics more, as I keep using the word revolutionary, more helpful.
Yeah.
That it interprets the data for you. It doesn't just give you the data raw like that. It doesn't mean that much to you that way.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you said like 120 decibels, I'm like, okay, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So you wore a CGM. How long did you wear it for?
A month. So each one lasts 14 days. So I
Okay.
wore it two,
You
two
had
at a
two
time
back to back?
back
Okay,
there.
okay. And you use this on your arm, your abdomen?
So the brand that I use uses the Freestyle Libre, and that one goes on the back of your arm. I think the Dexcom one goes on your stomach. That one lasts longer and is considered to be more accurate, but it's also more expensive.
More expensive. Okay. And did it hurt? Like, was it uncomfortable? Could you shower normally? Did you have to take it off and put it back on?
No, so it's just like a small pinch. So it's a white circular device. It comes with, it's hard to describe. I guess you have to see it and you just punch it on basically. And so just a little pinch at the time and that's it. And then they give you a patch that you can just cover it with. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you could shower, swim, just live life
Go
normally.
to the beach, everything, and it
Yeah,
doesn't tamper with the device.
no,
Wow.
yeah.
So, what were the biggest insights, like the things that surprised you most from your month wearing the monitor?
Well, one of the biggest thing for me is that it helped me change my breakfast, like the way I broke my fast. And I
Mm-hmm.
started getting insights to this even before when I was following the glucose goddesses, what she calls hacks. Is that how we break our fast in particular is very, very important. So I would usually break my fast with a smoothie, a protein shake. So,
Mm,
I thought I was doing it right because it didn't just have the fruits alone, it had the protein from the protein shake. It was a sugar-free protein shake, but apparently it was sweetened with sucralose or sucralose, and that wasn't affecting me well. So I started off my morning with a spike every single day when I was having that
wow.
smoothie, and I wasn't aware, and I think I was being so healthy, and I would put oats in it too for that apparently sustained energy boost and all those different things I thought I was doing, all the right fruits. So I put my ashwagandha and all these lovely things, but it just wasn't working out for me.
Mm-hmm.
The fruit content clearly wasn't balancing out the protein in the shake. So it helped me to just see how different foods affected me and how different foods that are quote unquote healthy
Healthy.
are not necessarily good for your blood sugar. And so I don't want to say it was a confusing time, but health can be confusing. So I realized you have to kind of narrow it down to what are your health goals? What are you trying to achieve? Because a banana is healthy, it has potassium and all these lovely things. But you eat that first thing in the day, you're setting yourself up for failure if you just eat the banana
Wow.
alone. Because banana is very, very healthy. But from a blood sugar perspective, breaking your fast with just bananas,
Big glucose spike.
most people, it would cause an extreme glucose spike. And then the dangers with the glucose spike is that when you rise, you fall, and that crash can cause you to be like jittery, and the average person, it just makes you tired. So what we call ethnic fatigue in the Caribbean, it's actually most times because we eat heavy food, the macaroni pie, the rice, the provisions, all those things all at once. We have the rise, and then we have that crash, that energy low. So the CGM gave me insight in terms of how I could have sustained energy instead of that crash and burn. So that was one of the biggest insights, helping me understand that what was healthy wasn't always good for my blood sugar. So I changed my breakfast in particular to savory, eating savory, low carb foods. I realized it helped me have a more steady on the graph, and also how I felt. Like I could go much longer periods without eating. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a snacker. Like I always
Mm-hmm.
have snacks in my bag because I cannot let hunger happen to me. I'm not a nice person when I'm hungry. So I always had snacks in my bag, and I just thought getting hungry was a personality trait, just the kind of person I am. I need to just have snacks because, when that hunger hold me, I need to have something now. So I thought that was normal. It turns out that I clearly had blood sugar imbalances, that those spikes and crashes were causing me to have this kind of urgent hunger. But hunger doesn't have to feel urgent like that.
Urgent.
So it should just be like a gradual thing that comes on to indicate that you need to eat. But like prehistoric man used to be going days without without eating. So then I came across the concept of metabolic flexibility, that
Mm.
humans are like hybrid cars. We function on fuel and we can function on fat. But because we've been told all this thing about snacking and that you always have to be eating, our body never gets to use the fat stores because we're always giving it, quote unquote, the gas. So it doesn't have to use the alternative fuel source. So trying to unlearn and fix all those things was quite a journey.
Wow, I could only imagine because what you're saying about having to eat constantly, I've heard over and over again. Try to eat small meals every couple hours. Break your fast in the morning with fruit or yogurt and fruit or oatmeal with fruit or whatever. And
Yes.
I noticed that for myself that I spent some time having oatmeal with bananas for breakfast. And by lunchtime, not even by lunchtime, I would eat maybe at 9. By 11:30, I was a mess, like shaky. I had to get something to eat now, or else I felt like agitated and irritated. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I can definitely relate it from my own experience. So it's like, speaking of that, how did you find different types of carbs or different types of sugars affected your body differently? So what was it like eating like ice cream versus provision or macaroni pie and stuff like that? How did that impact your blood sugar?
Well, I must say I wasn't very scientific about it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like I didn't. So I'm gonna do it again, and I'm gonna try to be more rigorous and so I was just quote unquote living and just seeing how the results were. One thing I did realize as you asked about ice cream is that I realized, and Glucose Goddess once again speaks a lot about this in terms of food ordering. So she always advocates if you're going to have dessert or anything overly sweet, have it last. Because
Mm-hmm.
by then it would take much longer to enter the bloodstream because the body is already digesting the fiber and other things you've eaten before. So she advocates eating your fiber. So she usually calls it like a green starter. So having your salad first, then having your protein, and having your sweet items or your carbs last. And that's the other thing. You might think that you're not eating a lot of sweet things, but then you're eating a lot of things that are made out of refined carbohydrates. And those things break down into the body as sugar anyway. And then sugar is in a lot of things that aren't even sweet. So in terms of just reading your label, so we're getting a lot of sugar in areas that we don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
So the main thing that I realized is that eating dessert, so eating it after instead of just eating sweet things. Another thing that she advocates, and Dr. Fung too, Jason Fung advocates, is don't eat naked carbs. So always, because fats have been demonized, this whole low fat and low calorie and that fats are evil, but they're not. So in terms of combining and don't eat carbs alone, so eating carbs with fat helps blunt your blood sugar response. So and then also with vinegar. That's something that I haven't tested myself, but there are lots of studies that show that having carbs with vinegar or having vinegar before your carbs helps blunt the response. But one thing I learned about myself using the CGM and carbs was that
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm using the correct terminology, but I seem to be more insulin sensitive later on in the day. So if I have a plate of like pasta in the day, I would have a big spike. But if I have it perhaps later on in the evening, and when I have carbs later on in the evening, my spikes are not as high. So I'm
Yeah.
not certain it's because of the activity that I'm engaging during the day or so I don't have an answer for it, but I noticed that eating carbs later in the day, my spikes tend to be smaller than when I eat it earlier. And then eating carbs or pairing your carbs close to exercise was also, I would get a good glucose response. I remember like I had a plate of Alfredo, nice starchy, real, not no chickpea pasta or anything, actually no real pasta,
Yeah.
Alfredo. But I had it after a workout. So like the app gave me a 7, which is pretty good. I didn't have a steep rise because usually the aim is to have your blood sugar not rise over 140 deciliters. That's usually what is
Mm-hmm.
aimed for non-diabetic people. So no more than like a 20 to 30 millimeter rise is what is your aim when you eat anything. So I was able to not rise with such a starchy meal because it was combined after exercise. Because I don't want it to seem like fruit and fruit is a controversial one, or even sweet things are the devil. It's more about being strategic about how you eat it. Most of us lead sedentary lifestyles. We're not like prehistoric man that was hunter gathering and looking for food and moving around. We eat and we just sit down at our desks.
Yeah.
We do not burn enough fuel compared to what we eat.
What we're taking in. Yeah.
And yeah, so we always have this surplus. So that is the problem. If you find a way to channel to use up that glucose, use up that extra, that's fine. So combining it around workouts, I found has been quite helpful for
That makes a lot of sense because I've always like I said, I follow your um food blog and I follow your food page on Instagram,
me.
and I'm always like, Rosanna is all drinking cocktails, having desserts, either like, how does she do it? Because these are things that personally for me, as somebody who had, been struggling with PCOS, I've, been able to find relief from a lot of my symptoms now, but I still find myself sensitive to sugar. So it's always trying to figure out, like you said, how can I, live but be strategic about how I'm doing it. So, this conversation has been extremely enlightening for me. Are there any like other big dietary changes or lifestyle changes that you think you have implemented since using the CGM, or just because of the insights that you found out with the CGM?
No, so as I said, the main thing is I changed up my breakfast. So that was like the
Mm-hmm.
main thing. Having a savory breakfast, savory low
So when you
carb.
say savory breakfast, do you still have bread and butter, or is it mostly eggs, or, what does that look like?
Okay, so on average, so I've started eating a lot more like sardines,
Mm,
salmon. So my breakfast might look a bit more like what a typical lunch might look like. So I
okay.
tend to stay away from bread and those sorts of starchy things. So sometimes I might even eat leftover dinner for breakfast. So my breakfast tends to usually have like salad and some sort of protein. And getting enough protein is another thing that I've started to pay more attention to, particularly in the morning, trying to aim for at least 30 grams of protein, quality protein. And so I've started to take protein shakes perhaps later on in the day. I think I'm going to change the brand I use, but I have it already, so I'm not going to waste
Gonna
it.
finish it?
But
Yeah.
yeah, but even those that are sweetened with things, as I said, those artificial sweeteners can still be problematic. So the main changes I've made are the breakfast I have and be more strategic about when I eat carbohydrates.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And in general, of all the things that you've learned from your experience, the new changes that you've made, if there are just a couple things that you would want people listening to this podcast to take away from your experience and possibly try implementing in their own lives, what would that be?
It would be everybody needs to monitor their blood sugar, not just persons with a family history of diabetes. Everyone is important to everyone. Especially many people are in the pre-diabetic range and things don't get flagged until you get to that stage. For instance, recently a family member of mine went to the doctor, did her check, and she was found to be pre-diabetic. And the doctor was like, okay, like just sent her home, like with no plan, nothing. He just mentioned, oh, your blood sugar's in the pre-diabetic range, and just that was it. There was no plan. Like you do not have to get to the diabetic range. It can be reversed. It can be, so the changes can be made. So in terms of just being aware of what your baseline is to begin with, so
Mm-hmm.
do an annual test. So not everyone would need to go all the way and get a CGM. That's if you're just, as I consider, like a biohacker, somebody that's really interested in how to hack your biology. But not everyone is that extreme. So just do your annual check so at least you know what your baseline is
Mm-hmm.
one of the main things I would say. Another thing I would say is read your labels. And that is I don't want to say a new passion of mine, but there's a lot of false advertising and a lot of false marketing out there. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist about big pharma and big agriculture and go down that line. But we need to take charge of our health. And then there's this brand, I don't want to call them out, this Caribbean brand that makes Bajan cherry juice. And this little Tetra pack box has 40 grams of sugar. The recommended sugar for a person, well, it's different for males and females, but I remember the one for female is at least 25 grams is what, the maximum sugar that you're supposed to have. And this little Tetra pack has 40 grams of sugar. And it's marketed, as a vitamin C and all these good things that this is giving you. But what is the trade-off? So yes, vitamin C is good for you, but vitamin C plus this truckload of sugar. So things like juice that are marketed to us as being healthy. I would say juices has little health benefits. Better to just eat the fruit whole. It has fiber. If you try to eat 5 apples, it'll be very difficult. But if you just drink a box of apple juice, you drink it down in a gulp because it's easy. We're meant to have the fiber as well. So in terms of, there's a lot of misleading marketing, what is considered healthy. I remember when we were growing up, you remember the got milk commercials with the milk mustache that we needed milk. We needed cow milk in order to function. And then that's not true. So it's a lot of what is told to us, what is marketed to us is not necessarily accurate. So I would have said at least read your labels. Be conscious of how much sugar you may consume, be consuming. Because the average person will be like, oh, I don't really eat cake or ice cream or the things that come to mind. But even things like cricks, which is refined carbs, that breaks down into sugar, your breads, your pastas, your rice, things that we eat on average, there's a lot of sugar in it. Your ketchup, a lot of the condiments, your salad dressing, so if you look at how many things you use that have what we call hidden sugars in it, you're consuming a lot more sugar than you realize. So stay away from juice would be one of my my first things. Juice has nothing to offer you. You can get the vitamins and so from other sources. So you might be like, oh, I don't drink soda. I drink juice. Even if when you juice your own juices, freshly or fresh pressed juices, stick more to vegetables. When you're juicing your pineapple and your mango and your apple and it's just sugar that you're consuming. And another misconception is that, I'm having maple syrup or I'm having honey, I'm having agave, I'm having
Yep,
jaggery, I'm
yep.
having coconut sugar, that this somehow makes it better. Still sugar to the body. So that's why I sometimes I get so frustrated and I don't want to be that person that in people DMs telling them, that's not good for you, right? But some people,
Yes,
they
I know.
want to be good and they want to do good and they're genuinely trying. And they
Yes,
post up their
yes.
yogurt and their banana and and I'm like, you know how much sugar is in that you plate? Like
I
yogurt is another
remember,
thing.
yes, when I went to I was having trouble with the sugar crashes, but I didn't know they were sugar crashes. I just knew I was getting shaky and really sleepy in the morning. And the doctor told me, have Yoplait yogurt with the Nature Valley granola bar, mash it up and put it in the yogurt and put some fruits on top like a banana. And maybe that will help me through the morning to get to lunch.
That's a sugar bomb. Nature
Exactly.
Valley is not healthy. That's another thing. If you read how much sugar is in the Nature Valley bars, and that's why I say it, and that's why I say it hurts me because people genuinely, as I say, want to
Don't
do
know.
good. You read the label, it's marketed as being healthy, and then what is health really? So it's a whole, I don't want to say frustrating, but it can be in that you're just trying to do your best. And that's what leads me to my interest in global health law in terms of
Mhm.
front of label, marketing, and packaging. In some countries,
Mhm.
they put warning labels on food. So, like for cigarettes, and so you might see it says dangerous, stay away, and those sort of things. Like we all know that cigarettes harm us. There are those sorts of labelings on things like cereal and stuff with lots of sugar. So people know they consume it at their own risk. They're aware
Yeah.
that this has a lot of sugar and it has the warning label on it. But when we go to the supermarkets and all these things are marketed, the Cheerios, the honey nut Cheerios are being marketed as heart healthy and all these different terms. Like there is no regulation on the terms that you can use in marketing. So what is healthy, what is heart healthy, all these things, anybody can just slap that on to food. Like there is no regulation in that. And there can be, and there is
Yeah.
in certain places. So that's one of the reasons I think it would help people in terms of being able to tell what is good for them and what isn't. Because to be real, the average person doesn't have time to be reading through labels. They probably have a child with them and they're in a rush. And, life happens and we can't be spending all our energy reading labels. And then even sugar doesn't always appear as sugar on the label, um, high
High fructose
fructose
corn syrup.
corn syrup and all these different terminologies. So it's not always easy to spot. So it takes a lot of energy if you're going to really devote yourself to that. And the average person doesn't have the time or interest in spending so much energy on what they're eating tonight. So these labels help to make your life a bit easier by telling you up front, be careful with this.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're so right. That's so important because I remember when I first went to university, my roommate used to spend hours in the supermarket reading every single label. And I personally would get so frustrated with that. Like, we want to miss the bus, we need to get out of here. But then 5 years later, when I started, suffering with my own metabolic health issues, I was like, no, this makes sense. And now I find myself actually reading all the labels and, doing all of that stuff. And a lot of people don't bother with that. That's not something that's on their radar. And if you could just walk into the supermarket and pick up the bottle of yogurt or a container of yogurt and see upfront anything that's dangerous about it or that you should be aware of before you consuming it, because that's not to say that you're going to not consume it at all. Like you said, you could strategically figure out how to include those things in your diet without the harmful effects. But the point is, you need to be aware of the possible harmful effects in order to strategize and figure out how to mitigate them if it's something you still want to include, right? So definitely appreciate all of your efforts there. I think that's a very, very important thing for people to be aware of and for laws to facilitate. If I'm using the right, if facilitates is the right word, but yeah, just like make it more easy and straightforward for people to do the right thing instead of hiding behind false advertising, you know?
When we consider blood sugar, food is just one part of the equation. It's not just
Mm,
only food we need to be aware of. Our sleep, our stress levels, and our levels of exercise also affect our blood sugar levels. So that's another thing that I would want to monitor more closely. But for instance, stress releases cortisol, and cortisol causes our blood sugar levels to rise. So even when you are eating all the right things,
right
and when you're
foods.
very stressed, and that happens to me a lot. Like when I have deadlines, and so I still end up snacking, although I had a glucose steady breakfast or a glucose steady lunch, because the cortisol is there sending my blood sugar up and then down. Your sleep, and even exercise. Like I remember I've started doing more fasted workouts because I'm trying to be, more metabolically flexible. And I would see on the glucose monitor that my blood sugar would rise and fall. And it's because my own body is releasing glucose from its stores to provide energy for me
Wow.
to work out. So it's not that every spike is bad, because we do need glucose. But it was just fascinating to see that my own body can produce glucose. I don't need to eat every time I
Eat.
need to work
That's
out. My
so
body will
interesting.
provide will provide the fuel for me to work out. So it's like, so that's
I
another
love that you
insight that
brought
I
that
just
up. Thank you
remembered.
for not letting me kick you out before you brought that up, because I was literally having a conversation with somebody this week and they were talking about how they've changed their diet so much and they still feel like they're not getting the results that they want. And my question to them was, well, what is your life like? Like, are you stressed? Are you in a high stress work environment, or do you have a lot of stress in your personal life? Because I think you're right. People underestimate how um, mental health impacts your hormone health, and things like getting enough sleep, being out in nature, even, making sure you're relaxed, sometimes even meditating and having other mindfulness practices can help with your stress levels, which then help with your hormone levels and, mitigate some of those glucose spikes. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And I did not know that your body would do that. I don't know what I thought was happening when I was doing when I would exercise when I'm fasting, but I did not think it was that. That's
Yeah,
very interesting.
yeah.
Any
And as
other
you
final
mentioned,
thoughts?
hormones. Like that's
Yeah.
another factor, because I remember, and this is perhaps slightly off strictly blood sugar, but I used to
Mm-hmm.
be one of those people that believe in that for weight loss it was just strictly calories in, calories out.
Got
And
results,
because
yes.
yeah, so that whole hormones and how hormones affect everything, and that insulin is a hormone, and once again, it's not just what you eat, it's how you sleep, is your stress, and also what you apply on your skin. The skin is your biggest organ. So I've been reading about endocrine disruptors, and it's like a whole other rabbit hole I'm currently on, with all these products and what they do and how they mimic estrogen and how they throw off all sorts of things. So it's like another rabbit hole I'm currently going down on in terms of cleaning up my health products, not just what I eat, but what I put on my skin,
Mm-hmm.
fragrance, aluminium, your deodorant, like all those other aspects of health. So it's not just what you put into your mouth that affects your overall health.
Yeah, it really is a complete experience. What you put on your skin, what you put on your body, what you put in your body, the environment that your body is in, not only external but your internal environment in terms of, your stress levels and all of that. It really is everything. And yeah, I just want to thank you again for really joining me here and sharing your experience with us. I've learned a lot. I know everybody who's listening will definitely learn a lot. And, as you go down future rabbit holes, I'd be happy to have you on here and we could discuss them together because I'm also going down the rabbit hole of what I put on my body. And a couple years ago, we started making our own body butter to avoid using like scented fragrances, fragrance creams, and stuff like that. So, yeah, happy to have you on here to talk about any future rabbit holes you go down, any other experiences you want to share with us.
Okay.
Any other like final thoughts you wanted to
I just want to give
share
a
before we
disclaimer
end?
that, I am not a medical professional. So please, do your own research, do your own independent research into things. You cannot take what I'm saying. I am not a medical doctor. I have no
Mm-hmm.
medical training. I probably used wrong terminologies along the way. This was just my experience that I'm sharing. So the main takeaway is that I just want people to be advocates for their own health, to take the driver's seat, do your own research. There are so many resources on the internet. Instagram itself can be very, very helpful. So it's not just about watching aimless reels. You can learn a lot on there. There are a lot of accounts that I like to follow that I learn from. So in terms of just being mindful of our health, you don't need to just deal with it when things happen. You don't have to end up being diabetic. You don't have to end up having hypertension, and people are having these things younger and younger. So in terms of just, as I say, know your baseline, check yourself every year, every 2 years, but be aware of where you are, would be my just general advice.
Yes, plus 100 to everything Rosanna just said. Everybody's bodies are unique, and the things that work for her might not work for you. Like she said, do your own research. None of us are medical professionals. We're just here sharing our own experiences in the effort to try to help, other people who might be going through something similar. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I
You're
thoroughly
welcome.
enjoyed this conversation. Looking forward to possible future conversations and all the best.
All right,
Bye.
take care. Bye bye.